Welcome back to Color Review, where you suggest movies, I watch them during the day, and tell my wife I'm working. So the way this works is I'm gonna watch the film, pull some frames from it, and then we're gonna look at them in a little more detail, like analyze where do the highlights sit, what are the skin tones looking like, where do the shadows sit, and then some of those either accents or in-between colors in the midtones. So if that sounds interesting to you, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you won't miss any of them when they come out. The movie we're breaking down today is Little Women, and Tara reminded me yesterday that it was 1 year since we saw Little Women actually in the theaters, before the entire world blew up. And with that, it's movie watching time. Hey Google, turn on the softbox. You like that? Set that up last week. Throughout the film, I was grabbing stills on the control panel, and let's move over to the desk and break it down. The color blue was really essential for them in this film, and it tells an interesting story. But before we kind of get to the blue, I want to show us the opposite side first, which is a very warm look. So if you take a look at this, inside their home, especially when it leans towards, you could call it like the good old days or memories of family when they were all together, they lean into this really, really, really warm look. So one of the things that we find is that the highlights are not pure white. The highlights definitely lean into that slight beigey, warm white point. And we notice that all the way through the shadows. So let's pick some shadow area over here to kind of contrast that, right? The shadows aren't 100% black. They still have some warmth to them. If you've seen this lamp back here, which probably is also white, right? It's all leaning towards these warm tones. We also find some kind of reddish brown elements in there, as well as some very like earthy, like to my eyes, this looks kind of like a earthy, olivey green in there, but most of it feels really, really, really warm. One of the things that you'll find whenever they're leaning into this family or warm look is especially when it is being lit by fire or candle, it's just incredibly warm. So take this shot, for example. Do you see how firelight is kind of coming through the window and hitting their faces, right? Like this is incredibly orange key light, right? In the back, you do get a little bit of a more pale highlight, but most of this is keyed by this incredibly warm, highly saturated yellow gold tone from fire. We also get some nice red tones here from the costumes, and let's just see where the shadows are ending up. The shadows are ending up, yeah, the shadows are a little more neutral in this, but they definitely lean towards the more red side. Now, let's contrast that when we move to some of the New York locations. Now story-wise, right, Joe moves out of the house, lives in New York, and does some writing and things like that. So you'll notice in this scene right here, once again, being lit by firelight, but how do we communicate difference in location? Well, let's change the color of firelight. So as we're noticing, her key light becomes a little more yellow, a little more dull in tones, When you compare it with kind of the really highly saturated golden tones on the right, you start noticing it you get a little more kind of like yellows and greens. It's falling more into these like olive tones. Let's see, let's pull some shadows. Shadows are sitting, neutral, almost maybe a little cool inside the shadows as well. Let me pull the wall in the back. It's also sitting kind of desaturated, a little yellow, a little green. Now, this isn't blue yet, but you can see how we're starting to separate locations. Now, blue is introduced as we move further and further away from that like ideal core warm family look. So in this shot where Joe is starting to pitch her story, we'll take a look at the highlights here. So the highlights are already starting to look quite pale and blue. I'm trying to find some white points of the image, but you'll see most of them are already kind of leaning to those blue areas. The shadows, if we pull some of the shadows, it's barely navy, but leans really close to black. But then the characters are also wearing these wonderful navy colors to add to the look of the film. Skin tones, it looks like she has some nice variety in the skin tones. So a little rosy in there, and then a little more what I would think of as like traditional skin tone. The wall is kind of this nice, slightly, there's this little bit of green in it to help counteract some of the deeper blues of the scene. And then they also let the wood come through, which I think is a really, really, really good call. Let me see if I can get a good wood level. Not overly saturated, but a really nice palette of colors that you are noticing is drifting further and further away from home, from that orangey, warm, golden tones of home. One of the scenes that just got me so excited when I saw it, because it showed the power that this color theory can have, is on Christmas morning. So if you don't know the story, on Christmas morning, they find out that there is a someone in the town who doesn't have food for Christmas morning, so they go and visit them. So this shot right here is the shot of them about to leave their house. Notice it's warm, it's almost a little pink to the highlights. It's a really beautiful image. But when they enter the house of this family that doesn't have food, you'll notice the highlights instantly. You see that right there? Highlights instantly go crisp and very clean and clinical and not highly saturated. But what happens as the family begins to unpack their meal? Watch what happens to the highlights between when they enter and when the food comes out. Ready for this? Boom. Look at that. I know it's not the greatest image right here because the camera was panning, so it's a little blurry. But notice, even though there are still elements of blue in there, there is a dramatic change that happens from when hope is injected into the scene. And we see it as simply as this. These shots are seconds apart, but hopeless, then we see hope and warmth being moved into the image. One of the things they do really well is echoes of color. So the idea is they'll visit a location a number of times, but then they'll change the way that they color graded the scene to give it a dramatically different emotion. So a great example of this is when Beth dies. And if you didn't know Beth dies, the book's been out for like 153 years. I definitely did not just Google that and do the math just to look cool. One of the core memories that they have is this great time at the beach with their family. And they end up revisiting a beach while Beth is sick. And watch what happens, right? We go from the warmer tones of the really, really good memories of that early beach visit to some of the cooler tones of, leaning into, Beth is sick. We're taking hope a little further and further away from this story. You see this also early on when Beth got sick. There's this great scene where Jo runs down the stairs. She goes into the kitchen, and this shot happens right here. Her mother leans back, and it reveals Beth behind her. But later on, after Beth dies, we don't know Beth dies yet, but what does that scene look like? Same kitchen, different color grading. We know, before the shot even comes, as she's running down the stairs, we know Beth has died because of the shift that happened emotionally in the tone of the image. We also see this color theory play out as Amy travels to Europe. So much of Europe in the film falls into these cool tones, right? Those highlights are very, they're not even starchy white. They start to lean blue. The costumes leans blue, some of the art design. And it's really a beautiful look, but you notice the stark contrast it has to their home growing up. You notice this color theory as well as Jo is traveling back home when her sister's sick. The town is very, cool. The white point you'll see below, the white point is definitely cool. But early on in the movie, you'll see that their home is very warm with a very warm white point. Now the film ends on this shot, which is a very neutral shot. It doesn't pull strongly towards that warm look that we've established or that cool look that we talked about. And I think that's very fitting. Because she's not just returning back to normal. If you know the story, Jo gets her book published, but she gets her book published after a lot of really good things and a lot of really tragic things have happened in her life. So I do not think it is any mistake that this film ends neutral, and it's one of the reasons why I think they did a really great job with the color on it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this color breakdown of Little Women. If you haven't seen the movie already, I highly recommend it. And keep an eye out for some of those warm tones and how they use that to tell the closeness of family, but then those cool tones and that blue to show the distance away from family. Just as kind of a final bonus one, take a look at this image. This is when Amy gets proposed to over in Europe. Yeah. No surprise that the color that both the guy who proposes and what she is wearing at the moment is blue, distant from family and that core home warmth. Now, we didn't actually look at all the frames I pulled from the film just because, the video can't be an hour long. But if you do want to see all the frames I pulled, as well as maybe use them for reference images or your own personal study, there is a link down in the description where you can download those and use them for your own projects. If you like this video and you want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. I'm going to be doing this once a month. And if you want to suggest a movie for me to do a breakdown on, follow me on Instagram and be checking my stories, because that is where I will be sourcing future movie suggestions from. All right, that's what I got for today. Hey Google, turn off the softbox.